Cotton, the fabric that made the modern world, by Giorgio Riello, traces the fascinating history of cotton from its early cultivation and manufacturing in India to its central role in the industrialization of Europe and the United States. Through this story of a single commodity, Riello reveals the complex interconnections between trade, technology, slavery, and colonialism that shaped the modern world economy. The book begins by examining the first cotton revolution that took place in India between 1000 and 1500 CE. During this period, Indian artisans achieved unparalleled skill in spinning, weaving, dyeing, and printing cotton textiles. Centers like Bengal and Gujarat became famous for producing fabrics of exceptional quality and design, such as fine muslins and intricately patterned calicos. These cotton textiles were traded across extensive networks throughout the Indian Ocean region and beyond, reaching Southeast Asia, the Middle East, East Africa, and eventually Europe. Riello argues that India's success was built on a unique system of specialized small-scale production. Skilled weavers worked in households or village workshops, drawing on family labor and networks of regional exchange. The arrival of European traders in the Indian Ocean during the early 16th century marked the beginning of a new era. Portuguese, Dutch, and English merchants were initially drawn to the region in pursuit of spices. However, they quickly realized the immense potential of Indian textiles, which combined beauty and affordability. As European demand for Indian cotton grew, the East India Companies established trading posts and factories throughout the subcontinent. They sought to learn the secrets of Indian textile production and secure a reliable supply of goods for export. This required navigating complex networks of local brokers, merchants, and craftsmen. European merchants struggled to match the quality and variety of Indian cloth. They had to carefully study consumer preferences and market demand, as a single region like Coromandel could produce dozens of distinct textile varieties. The companies hired local experts to help translate their needs to weavers and advise on design modifications. Despite these efforts, Indian textiles remained vastly superior to European imitations. When the English East India Company sent home its first cotton cargo in 1631, the coarse cloth was deemed only suitable for use as packing material. It would take over a century of trial and error before Europeans could spin and weave cloth of comparable quality to Indian imports. In the meantime, Indian textiles became a sensation among European consumers. The bright colors and intricate patterns of chintz and calico offered a striking alternative to the drab woolens and linens that had previously dominated wardrobes. However, the spread of cotton clothing was a gradual process, moving from a luxury reserved for the wealthy to a widely adopted fabric by the mid-18th century. The rising popularity of Indian cottons provoked a backlash from European textile producers, who feared disruption to their traditional wool and silk industries. Under pressure from these powerful lobbies, England, France, and other states imposed bans or high tariffs on the import of finished cotton textiles between 1686 to 1774. However, these mercantilist policies had little success in stemming European demand for Indian cloth. Vibrant smuggling networks circumvented the restrictions, while the East India Companies exploited loopholes by importing plain cotton fabric for printing within Europe itself. The bans proved a boon to the nascent European cotton printing industry, which flourished in cities like London, Amsterdam, and Marseille. European textile printers reverse-engineered Indian dyeing and printing techniques, aided by the expertise of Armenian and Ottoman artisans long familiar with these methods. The pioneer Franco-German printer Christoph Philipp Oberkampf became renowned for his polychrome floral prints on fine white cottons, produced at his famous manufactory in Jouy-en-Josas near Paris. Such imitations soon rivaled Indian originals in the eyes of consumers. Two European regions emerged as important new centers of cotton textile production in the 18th century: Normandy in France and Lancashire in England. Manufacturers in the French city of Rouen and English town of Manchester initially specialized in cheap cotton linen fustians for export to the West Indies and Africa, where they were exchanged for slaves. By mixing cotton and linen, they avoided the restrictions on pure cotton cloth. However, it was in Britain that the cotton industry would take its most decisive steps forward. The inventions of the flying shuttle, spinning jenny, water frame, and spinning mule from the 1730s to 1780s revolutionized the productivity of cotton spinning. For the first time, British manufacturers could spin cotton yarn that was fine and strong enough for use as both warp and weft, eliminating the need for linen. This technical breakthrough marked the start of cotton's central role in Britain's Industrial Revolution. Over the next half-century, British cotton cloth production increased tenfold. Giant steam-powered mills replaced cottage workshops in Lancashire. By the 1830s, Britain accounted for 80% of the world's cotton textile exports. But, as Riello's book makes clear, the astonishing rise of the British cotton industry cannot be explained by technology alone. Mechanization was only one part of a much wider story, involving the expansion of slavery, colonialism, and ecological extraction across the globe. This was the second cotton revolution that created a new, raw material-intensive industrial system centered on Europe. The crucial turning point was the establishment of slave-based cotton plantations in the Americas, first on Caribbean islands like Barbados and Saint-Domingue, and then on a much vaster scale in the U.S. South. This marked a dramatic departure from the household-based cotton farming practiced in India, China, and the Ottoman Empire. New World cotton plantations were massive enterprises geared entirely towards supplying raw material to the mechanizing factories of Europe. Gangs of enslaved African workers toiled under brutal conditions to grow and harvest the crop using the most efficient methods. This system generated unprecedented increases in raw cotton output, which grew 90-fold in the U.S. South between 1791 to 1821. Riello argues that this cheap, slave-grown cotton had special properties as an industrial raw material. Since it was produced outside Europe, it could expand without encountering the ecological limits that constrained wool, flax, and other land-intensive crops grown within the region itself. Plantations in the Americas thus served as ghost acres, supplying the European economy with fiber. By the 19th century, this international division of labor allowed Europe to escape its Malthusian constraints and launch a fossil fuel-based economy of mass production and consumption. Abundant raw cotton from the U.S. South, coupled with Britain's productivity advantages from mechanization, allowed its manufacturers to dramatically undercut the prices of Indian textiles, which had reigned supreme for centuries. Under the banner of free trade, the British government used its growing imperial power to force open markets around the world to its cheap industrial goods. In India, colonial authorities eliminated tariffs on British imports while imposing high taxes on local weavers. They also converted vast swaths of the subcontinent into plantations for growing raw cotton to supply Lancashire's factories. Indigenous textile producers across Asia struggled to compete with the flood of cheap European cloth. In India, an estimated 1.5 million weavers were thrown out of work by the 1830s alone. China and the Ottoman Empire also witnessed a sharp decline in their once vibrant textile industries. However, recent scholarship has emphasized that this process of deindustrialization was not as abrupt or complete as once thought. Indian artisans survived by focusing on lower quality products or luxury items that British imports could not displace. At the same time, enterprising manufacturers in Bombay and Calcutta began to adopt European technologies to establish their own mechanized mills by the 1870s. Nevertheless, the rise of Britain's cotton industry and the European cotton system that sustained it had profound consequences for the shape of the 19th century world economy. Whereas in 1750, India had been the world's leading exporter of cotton textiles, a century later, half of its home market had been captured by Britain, and its once thriving weaving communities languished in poverty. Riello concludes that this great divergence between the West and the rest cannot be understood without the cotton industry. Before the Industrial Revolution, living standards in Europe and the most developed parts of Asia had been roughly comparable. But by 1900, Western Europe and the United States had leapt far ahead of the rest of the world in terms of wealth, productivity, and military power. Cotton textiles, more than any other commodity, allowed the ecologically constrained economies of Europe to escape the Malthusian trap and embark on the path of modern economic growth. At the same time, the regions that had once pioneered the global cotton industry, South Asia and China, found their manufacturing economies progressively gutted under the onslaught of European industrial competition. The cotton system described by Riello was thus profoundly unequal in its global structure. A vast international division of labor emerged, in which millions of enslaved Africans, indentured Indians, and indigenous Americans produced raw materials and cheap consumer goods for the benefit of metropolitan capital. The rivers of cloth that flowed outward from Manchester and Liverpool were matched by counterflows of resources, profits, and power toward imperial Europe. Yet the story of cotton did not end with the European Industrial Revolution. In the 20th century, the centers of cotton textile production shifted once again, this time to East Asia. Japan's dramatic industrialization during the Meiji era saw it briefly emerge as the world's largest textile exporter. After World War II, the industry increasingly relocated to Hong Kong, Taiwan, South Korea, and coastal China. Since the 1980s, the unleashing of China and India's immense productive capacities has inaugurated a 21st-century cotton and textile boom. Millions of rural migrants now toil in the garment factories of Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Ethiopia, supplying consumers across the global north with a superabundance of cheap, fashionable clothing. In this way, Riello's book highlights the enduring importance of cotton as a lens for understanding the past and present of the global economy. The fabric that made the modern world continues to connect the lives and livelihoods of millions across the planet's most dynamic and unequal regions. Its story, ever unfinished, remains as essential as ever. Long before the European Industrial Revolution, textile production and trade across the Indian Ocean and Eurasia were centered on Indian cotton. For centuries, skilled Indian artisans had produced the world's finest cotton textiles, which were eagerly sought by consumers from Japan to West Africa. This earlier cotton system was characterized by regional specialization and household production, with weavers and merchants across South and Southeast Asia participating in a complex, decentralized web of exchange. However, as Riello's book demonstrates, the rise of European colonialism and industrial capitalism from the 18th century onward fundamentally remade this world. Cheap cotton cloth from Lancashire's factories, produced with raw materials from slave plantations in the Americas, flooded markets around the globe. Indigenous textile industries in India, China, and the Ottoman Empire withered under this onslaught. The result was a dramatic great divergence between the economies of Western Europe and the rest of the world. Whereas living standards in Europe and Asia had been roughly comparable in 1750, by 1900 a yawning chasm had opened up. Britain and other Western European nations had become the workshops and bankers of the world, their productive and financial might secured by vast colonial empires. Yet, the nature of the global cotton industry began to shift once again in the 20th century. The center of textile and garment production moved to East Asia, first to Japan, and then to China, South Korea, and Taiwan. More recently, low-wage countries like Bangladesh, Vietnam, and Ethiopia have become integral to the global apparel supply chain. Today, the story of cotton remains central to understanding the functioning of the global economy and the profound inequalities that structure it. Riello's book offers a compelling longue-durée perspective on how this single commodity has connected and transformed lives across the world for nearly a millennium. From the Indian weavers who first unlocked the potential of this remarkable fiber, to the Chinese and Bangladeshi garment workers who toil in its factories today, cotton has bound together the fates of millions across profoundly uneven geographies of power and prosperity. It stands as a testament to the enduring importance of materiality in shaping the course of global economic history. At the same time, the story of cotton also highlights the critical role of culture, knowledge, and taste in shaping the fortunes of a global commodity. Indian artisans achieved early primacy in cotton textiles, not only because of their access to raw materials and skilled labor, but also due to their ability to produce designs and colors that catered to diverse consumer markets across Afro-Eurasia. Their fabrics were valued as much for their beauty and symbolic meanings as for their physical properties. Likewise, European producers only succeeded in displacing Indian textiles by learning to imitate and adapt these designs for their own consumers. The rise of a European fashion system that valorized novelty, individual self-expression, and cultural hybridity played a critical role in creating new markets for cotton clothing. The 18th century craze for chintz, followed by the Victorian era's love of crisp white cotton shirts and petticoats, was as much a cultural phenomenon as it was an economic one. The 18th century craze for chintz, followed by the Victorian era's love of crisp white cotton shirts and petticoats, was as much a cultural phenomenon as it was an economic one. In this way, Riello's study of cotton offers a powerful case study of the complex interdependencies between culture and economy, between local craft and global trade, that have shaped the modern world. It shows how a single commodity can transform not only modes of production and patterns of consumption, but entire ways of life and systems of meaning. In telling this story, Riello's book offers a masterful example of the power of global economic history to illuminate the forces that have made our world. By tracing the intricate webs of connection and exchange that have bound together distant regions and peoples, it helps us to see the past and present in a new light. At a time when the global economy is once again undergoing a profound transformation, with the rise of new powers in Asia and the unraveling of old certainties in the West, this perspective is more vital than ever. As we grapple with the challenges of climate change, pandemic disruption, and widening inequality, the story of cotton offers valuable lessons and cautionary tales. It reminds us of the inextricable links between the fortunes of nations and the lived experiences of individuals, between the abstract forces of the market and the concrete realities of work and consumption. It shows us how the global economy has been made and remade through the actions of countless individuals, from enslaved Africans to Indian weavers, to British inventors, to Chinese factory workers. Above all, the story of cotton teaches us that the path of global economic development is never a straight line, but a winding road full of detours, reversals, and unintended consequences. As we chart our way forward in an increasingly interconnected and uncertain world, we would do well to keep this lesson in mind.